The story begins with a dramatic conflict between Walter Carter, a war veteran, and the corrupt Homeowners Association, HOA, led by Carol Matthews. The HOA, operating like a private empire, used intimidation, fraud, and illegal tactics to force homeowners into submission, aiming to seize properties for personal and financial gain. Walter, however, was no ordinary homeowner. A former counterintelligence officer, he had spent years meticulously gathering evidence of the HOA's crimes, from forged votes to illegal land grabs. When the HOA resorted to kidnapping Walter in an attempt to silence him, they underestimated his resourcefulness and resolve. Walter's grandson, Jacob Carter, discovered his grandfather's disappearance after finding the house empty and his cane abandoned, a clear sign that something was terribly wrong. The only clue left behind was a formal notice from the HOA filled with bureaucratic threats. Fueled by anger and determination, Jacob confronted Carol Matthews at the HOA office, but her smug demeanor revealed she knew more than she admitted. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Jacob followed a piece of advice his grandfather had once given him. "If anything happens to me, don't waste time. Call this number." That call connected him to Agent Blake, a government official who immediately recognized the urgency of the case. Within minutes, federal agents stormed the HOA office, armed with warrants and damning evidence of widespread corruption. It became clear that Walter had deliberately allowed himself to be captured, knowing it would lead authorities straight to the heart of the conspiracy. His calculated move not only exposed the HOA's illegal activities, but also ensured their downfall. By the end of the day, the HOA's reign of terror was over, and Walter returned home as a hero, having outsmarted those who sought to destroy him. Walter Carter was no ordinary homeowner. A decorated war veteran and former counterintelligence officer, he had spent years meticulously gathering evidence of the HOA's illegal activities, knowing full well that they would eventually come after him. When the HOA escalated their tactics to kidnapping, Walter allowed himself to be taken, not out of weakness, but as part of a calculated plan to expose their corruption once and for all. His grandson, Jacob Carter, played an unwitting yet crucial role in unraveling the truth. Upon discovering his grandfather's disappearance, Jacob followed a trail of clues left behind by Walter. The abandoned cane, the ominous letter on the kitchen table, and even a cryptic number scribbled in a worn leather notebook. These were not signs of chaos, but deliberate breadcrumbs laid by a man who had spent decades preparing for this exact moment. Walter's background as a counterintelligence officer made him uniquely equipped to outsmart the HOA. Long before the conflict reached its boiling point, he had been quietly documenting every underhanded move the HOA made. Forged votes, fraudulent citations, illegal land grabs, and threats against homeowners. The USB drive hidden in his boot was the culmination of years of work, containing irrefutable proof of the HOA's crimes. Walter knew that if he could lure them into revealing their hand, it would lead federal authorities straight to the heart of their operation. By allowing himself to be captured, he ensured that the FBI would have undeniable evidence of wrongdoing when they found him. It was a risky gamble, but one Walter executed with precision. Jacob's discovery of the notebook and his subsequent call to Agent Blake marked the turning point in the story. The number Walter had given him wasn't just a random contact. It was a direct line to a government official prepared to act swiftly. When Jacob placed the call, Agent Blake didn't waste time questioning or doubting. He immediately mobilized resources, sending armed agents to the HOA office within minutes. This rapid response underscored the gravity of the situation and highlighted how thoroughly Walter had anticipated the outcome. Even in captivity, Walter remained calm and composed, confident that his preparations would pay off. The scene in the basement where Walter was being held revealed the depth of his resolve. Despite being bound and bruised, he greeted the arriving agents with a grin, quipping about how long it took them to arrive. More importantly, he handed over the USB drive without hesitation, ensuring that the evidence would bring down not just Carol Matthews, but the entire corrupt network she led. Walter's ability to think strategically, remain calm under pressure, and trust in his own preparation demonstrated why he was such a formidable opponent. He didn't fight the HOA with brute force, but with intelligence, patience, and foresight. In doing so, he proved that sometimes the easiest battles are those fought by someone who has already won before the first shot is fired. Through his actions, Walter became more than just a stubborn homeowner resisting change. He became a symbol of resilience and justice. His meticulous planning and unshakable determination inspired those around him, including Jacob, who came to realize that his grandfather wasn't merely defending a house, he was protecting values worth fighting for. The moment Jacob discovered his grandfather Walter was missing, the investigation into the HOA's actions took a dramatic turn. Armed with the cryptic number his grandfather had given him years ago, Jacob made the call that would unravel the entire conspiracy. On the other end of the line was Agent Blake, a government official who wasted no time asking questions or doubting Jacob's claims. Instead, he immediately ordered Jacob to stay put and not speak to anyone else, signaling the gravity of the situation. Within minutes, 3 black SUVs roared into the suburban neighborhood, screeching to a halt in front of the HOA office. Federal agents poured out, their presence commanding and authoritative, as they stormed into the building without warning. Carol Matthews, the once untouchable president of the HOA, was caught completely off guard. When the lead agent entered her office, she tried to maintain her composure, but it quickly became clear that this was no ordinary visit. A federal search warrant was produced, and Carol's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. The agents already knew about the fraudulent citations, illegal land grabs, and forged votes orchestrated by the HOA. They even had photographic evidence of Walter Carter bound and bruised in captivity, confirming Jacob's worst fears. Carol's attempts to deny involvement were met with cold indifference from the agents, who had already pieced together the full scope of her crimes. As the raid unfolded, another team moved swiftly to rescue Walter. They found him in the basement of an undisclosed location, zip-tied to a chair, but still grinning despite his injuries. Walter's calm demeanor spoke volumes. He had anticipated this outcome all along. Before the agents could even ask, he reached into his boot and handed over a USB drive containing years' worth of meticulously documented evidence against the HOA. This wasn't just a kidnapping, it was part of Walter's larger plan to expose the corruption at its core. Meanwhile, back at the HOA office, the arrests began. Board members were taken into custody one by one, their faces pale with shock as they realized there was no escape. Bank accounts were frozen, property deals canceled, and every under-the-table transaction laid bare for the world to see. By mid-afternoon, news outlets were reporting on the unprecedented scandal, painting the HOA as nothing more than a criminal enterprise masquerading as a neighborhood governing body. For Jacob, watching the operation unfold was surreal. What started as a desperate search for his grandfather had turned into a nationwide reckoning. As federal agents led Carol Matthews away in handcuffs, the crowd of neighbors gathered outside erupted in cheers. Justice had been served, and Walter Carter's calculated gamble had paid off in spectacular fashion. Through sheer determination and preparation, he had not only saved himself, but also dismantled an entire network of corruption. The exposure and downfall of the HOA marked a turning point not just for Walter Carter, but for the entire neighborhood. When federal agents stormed the HOA office, they didn't come empty-handed. Armed with damning evidence, documents, photos, drone footage, and emails, they dismantled the corrupt network piece by piece. Carol Matthews, once the untouchable queen of the HOA, was reduced to a trembling figure as her crimes were laid bare. The agent leading the operation wasted no time mincing words. "We know about the fraudulent citations, the illegal land grabs, the forged votes," he said, his voice cold and methodical. Each accusation hit like a hammer, leaving Carol and her cronies scrambling for excuses that no longer mattered. As the truth unfolded, it became clear that this wasn't just about Walter. It was about every homeowner who had been bullied, threatened, or stripped of their property by the HOA's greed. By mid-afternoon, news outlets across the country were buzzing with reports of the unprecedented scandal. Headlines screamed, "FBI raids suburban HOA in massive corruption case," and "Homeowners rejoice as corrupt leaders face federal charges." The story dominated social media feeds, television broadcasts, and online forums. For years, the HOA had operated under a veil of authority, intimidating residents into submission while enriching themselves through illicit deals. Now, their empire was crumbling before the world's eyes. Every board member involved in the scheme was arrested, their assets frozen, and properties seized. Developers who had colluded with them were also targeted, their under-the-table transactions exposed for all to see. For the community, the takedown felt like liberation. Neighbors who had lived in fear finally found their voices. One resident shouted during the arrest, "You stole homes! You threatened us!" Another spat near Carol's feet as she stood handcuffed on the steps of the HOA building. The crowd chanted, "Lock her up!" a cathartic release after years of oppression. But perhaps the most poetic justice came when Walter's home, the very house the HOA had tried so hard to erase, was declared a historic landmark. With evidence from Walter's meticulously compiled USB drive, the government classified the property as untouchable. No HOA regulation, developer loophole, or legal trickery could ever threaten it again. For Jacob, watching the events unfold was surreal. What began as a desperate search for his grandfather had turned into a nationwide reckoning. The HOA's fall wasn't just a victory for Walter. It was a triumph for everyone who had dared to stand against injustice. Carol Matthews, once arrogant and unshakable, now stood silent, unable to defend herself as cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. Her reign of terror was over, and Walter Carter, the man she had underestimated, emerged victorious. As Walter leaned back on his porch, sipping coffee and watching the chaos subside, he quipped dryly, "Taking down an HOA might have been the easiest war I've ever won." It was a moment of quiet satisfaction, a testament to resilience, preparation, and the enduring power of justice. Walter Carter's triumph over the HOA was not just a personal victory. It was a testament to resilience, justice, and the enduring power of standing up against corruption. When federal agents finally pulled away from the neighborhood, leaving behind stunned residents and handcuffed board members, Walter stepped back onto his porch as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The same house that the HOA had spent years trying to erase was now declared a historic landmark by the government, protected under federal law. No HOA regulation, no developer loophole, no legal trickery could ever touch it again. It was poetic justice in its purest form. The very home they sought to destroy became untouchable because of Walter's meticulous planning and unyielding determination. As Walter leaned back in his chair, sipping coffee with the calm demeanor of someone who had seen far worse than an HOA boardroom, he couldn't help but smirk. "You know what the funny thing is, kid?" he said to Jacob, clapping a firm hand on his grandson's shoulder. "They thought they could take me down. Turns out I was the one taking them down all along." His words carried the weight of decades, of surviving war zones, battling unseen enemies, and refusing to bow to anyone who tried to silence him. Walter wasn't just some stubborn old man. He was a fighter, a survivor, and now, undeniably, a hero. The neighborhood had transformed overnight. Neighbors who once feared the HOA now gathered outside Walter's home, cheering for the man who had stood firm when others backed down. Some held signs declaring, "Thank you, Walter," while others simply shook his hand, thanking him not only for saving his own home, but for exposing the systemic abuse that had terrorized the community for years. Reporters swarmed around him, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing like strobe lights. Yet, through it all, Walter remained unfazed, exuding the quiet confidence of someone who knew he'd done the right thing. Jacob watched his grandfather with a mix of admiration and awe. He realized then that Walter wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for everyone who had been bullied into submission. The HOA had underestimated him, thinking he was merely a relic of a bygone era. But Walter proved that age didn't define strength, nor did appearances reveal the depth of resolve beneath. By outsmarting those who sought to erase him, Walter became more than a homeowner or even a veteran. He became a symbol of hope and resistance. In the end, Walter's story reminded everyone of something profound. Justice may take time, but it always finds its way. And when it does, the people who refuse to give up often become legends in their own right. For Walter Carter, this battle might have been the easiest war he'd ever fought, but its impact would resonate far beyond the quiet suburban streets where it began. Walter Carter's triumph over the HOA was not just a personal victory. It was a profound testament to resilience, justice, and the enduring power of standing up against corruption. As the dust settled and the last federal vehicles pulled out of the neighborhood, Walter stepped back onto his porch, greeted by cheers from neighbors who had once lived in fear but now stood united in celebration. The same house that the HOA had spent years trying to erase was officially declared a historic landmark, protected under federal law. No HOA regulation, no developer loophole, no legal trickery could ever touch it again. It was poetic justice. The very home they sought to destroy became untouchable because of Walter's meticulous planning and unyielding determination. For Jacob, watching his grandfather return felt surreal. He realized then that Walter wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for everyone who had been bullied into submission. Carol Matthews and her cronies had underestimated him, thinking he was merely an old man clinging stubbornly to his property. But Walter was far more than that. A former counterintelligence officer, he had spent decades gathering evidence of the HOA's crimes, anticipating their every move. When they kidnapped him, they thought they were gaining leverage. Instead, they led authorities straight to their own downfall. Walter's calm demeanor as he handed over the USB drive, a document containing every illegal land grab, forged vote, and fraudulent citation, spoke volumes about his confidence and preparation. The HOA's collapse sent shockwaves through the community. Board members were arrested en masse, their assets frozen, properties seized, and reputations shattered. Carol Matthews, once the untouchable queen of the HOA, was reduced to a trembling figure as cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions she couldn't answer. Her smug facade crumbled completely, replaced by desperation and silence. Meanwhile, Walter leaned back in his chair on the porch, sipping coffee with the air of someone who had seen far worse than a HOA boardroom. "You know what the funny thing is, kid?" he said to Jacob, clapping a firm hand on his shoulder. "They thought they could take me down. Turns out I was the one taking them down all along." This moment solidified Walter's place as a legend in the neighborhood. Neighbors thanked him not just for saving his home, but for exposing the systemic abuse that had terrorized them for years. Walter's actions reminded everyone that justice may take time, but it always finds its way. For Jacob, this realization hit hard. His grandfather wasn't just some stubborn old man refusing to sell his house. He was history in the making. Despite everything the HOA threw at him, Walter stood taller than ever, proving that true strength lies not in brute force, but in preparation, resolve, and an unwavering commitment to doing what's right. The story of Walter Carter is a powerful testament to resilience, justice, and the enduring fight against corruption. What began as a personal battle between an elderly war veteran and a tyrannical HOA became a symbol of hope for an entire community. Walter's refusal to bow to intimidation wasn't just about preserving his home. It was about standing up for values like integrity, fairness, and accountability. His meticulous planning and unshakable determination inspired those around him, showing that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one person can make a difference. Jacob, who initially saw his grandfather as simply stubborn, came to realize that Walter was fighting for something much larger: the rights of every homeowner who had been silenced or bullied into submission. When the truth came to light, it wasn't just the HOA that fell. It was their culture of fear and greed. Walter's victory reminded everyone that justice may take time, but it always finds its way. For the neighbors who once feared the HOA, this moment marked a turning point. They cheered not only for Walter, but for the courage he embodied, proving that resilience and preparation can overcome even the most daunting challenges. The story of Walter Carter delivers a profound message. Perseverance and thorough preparation can help us overcome any adversity, regardless of age or circumstances. For older adults, this lesson becomes even more meaningful as it reminds us that life experience, accumulated wisdom, and calmness are powerful tools for facing challenges. Walter didn't just rely on bravery. He employed smart strategies, spending years gathering evidence to protect his home. A symbol of personal values and family memories. This teaches us that no matter how great the pressure from society or abusive authorities may be, standing firm and defending what is precious is always worthwhile. Life sometimes pushes us into difficult situations, but careful preparation, self-belief, and foresight will ultimately lead us to triumph. Walter's story serves as a powerful reminder. Never underestimate your own inner strength, because every person has the ability to make a difference in their own unique way.